Well, in this episode of Newt's World, what do Americans really think about K through 12 education? Each year, EdChoice's Schooling in America survey provides one of the most comprehensive answers to that question. They released the 2025 edition, their 13th annual nationally representative look at parents and the public's views on everything from school satisfaction and funding to educational choice policies and the role of government. Over the course of the survey's 13-year history, they've asked a set of recurring questions focusing on the direction of K through 12 education, parents' schooling preferences, parents' satisfaction with their children's schooling experiences, and public feelings towards educational choice policies. Here to discuss their 2025 survey, I am really pleased to welcome my guest, Robert Enlow. He is the president and CEO of EdChoice. Before the formation of EdChoice in 2016, Robert was an integral part of the Milton and Rose Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice from its launch in 1996. Under his leadership, EdChoice has become one of the nation's most respected and successful advocates for educational choice, working in dozens of states to advance parental freedom and education. Robert, welcome, and thank you for joining me again on Newt's World.
It's my pleasure, Mr. Speaker. Thanks for having me.
I have to ask you, your new Schooling in America report shows that more than two-thirds of Americans believe K through 12 education is on the wrong track. Why do you think public confidence in education is so low?
It's our 13th year of doing this survey. I wish I could say it was lucky number 13 for our government-run schools, but it's not. It's the second highest dissatisfaction that we've ever seen. And I think the answer for that is simple. Parents are telling us that these schools are not safe. My kids are getting bullied. My kids are mentally anxious, and they're not doing a good job of educating my kids. And on top of that, they're spending a ton of money that they don't know how it's being used. And so parents are frustrated with what's going on in K-12 education around the country.
Why hasn't there been a faster move towards really serious reform?
So the fast move to serious reform has been through school choice finally. So starting after COVID, we had 0 states that had universal choice. Now we have 19 states that have universal choice. We had less than, I think about 400,000 kids were on school choice by 2019. Now there's 1.3 million. So there is a massive growth in the private school choice sector. And the theory, of course, of Milton Friedman is if you allow massive choice, you're going to create more competition and the public school is going to have to improve. I think we're to that tipping point, Mr. Speaker, where we're to the point where there's enough choice in states like Arizona, Indiana, Ohio, Florida, where the public schools are either going to have to reform or adapt or die, as they used to say.
Well, and yet your own survey says that only 31% of Americans believe K through 12 education is headed in the right direction, and that is an 11-point decline since 2021.
Again, that's why people are going to choice and all sorts of, that's why you're seeing continued absenteeism. You're seeing continued migration to charter schools and private schools and choice programs. This dissatisfaction is why you're seeing homeschooling dramatically on the rise since COVID. So this dissatisfaction is leading to people making new choices.
One of the things that actually was a real surprise to me, a majority of Republican school parents say education is on the right track, but only a minority of Democrats and independents agree. Why is there this partisan difference?
My guess is the partisan difference in the right track is because many Republicans are choosing more of their education, whether it's a traditional public school by moving to a home district or not. And, we see changes in the survey when presidents come. So the first Trump presidency, you saw a greater level of dissatisfaction at the beginning with schooling, and at the end of it, you saw greater support. And so I think Republicans are just ahead of this trend when it comes to the idea of being more satisfied with their options and their choices.
Well, and you make the point in your report that private school parents are much more positive. About 49% of private school parents feel very satisfied with their child's school compared to 32% of public school parents. I mean, that's a big difference. It's almost a 50% differential.
It's a huge difference. And that's also true of, like, if you look at charter schools and homeschooling, so all the school types, parents that are choosing are happier and more satisfied. And it's the traditional public school where people are feeling like they have to be assigned. Later in the study, there's a question about why are parents choosing these schools? And it's very interesting to see the difference. So parents who are choosing private schools are doing so for academics, for safety, and for moral values. Parents who are choosing charter schools are doing so for academics, safety, and close to home. Parents who are choosing public schools are doing so for three reasons. It's close to their home, socializing their kids, and it's their assigned school. What's very interesting is that mere fact of choice between charter and private schools is driving the conversation to quality, to safety, and to moral values. And the more families that can choose from public schools, the better our society is going to be, frankly.
I'm amazed at the number of people who are concerned about safety in school. Not just physical safety, but also bullying and a whole sense of this is not a good environment. Do you find that across the country?
We do find that across the country. And we, of course, do another survey that's a monthly survey that is done in partnership with Morning Consult. And it has been a consistent trend over 5 years that parents are tired of their kids getting bullied in school. This sort of bullying is a huge issue for parents. Their child's mental health and anxiety. There's a lot of worry from families about their children having too much anxiety at a school, particularly at a public school where there's not a lot of safety. The parents are also at higher rates saying that we're worried about a shooting. These issues where public schools are not responding effectively to a child's bullying and a child's anxiety is really having an impact on parents. And they're saying that my kid's not safe. And they're looking at safety in a broader thing from just sort of physical safety. It's also emotional and mental safety.
A very large number of Americans, well over a majority, underestimate how much money we're already spending on public schools in their states. Baltimore City schools, which are the third most expensive in the country, are among the worst schools in the entire country. So there's not a correlation right now between how much we spend and what kind of education we're getting.
The idea that money has anything to do with quality of education is not the case. And the more money you see is often in the worst performing schools. Parents, however, and the public really just don't have a knowledge of how much we spend on K-12 education. They've been lied to for so long about how much we spend. They underestimate it to the tune of like somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000. It's crazy how much they underestimate how much you spend on public education. Now, when you tell them how much you spend, right, their idea of it being too low goes way down by about a third, right? So it's interesting when you actually inform them of how much the average spending is. The number of parents that are saying that we don't spend enough goes down by a third. I think that's why information is so important, and parents just don't have a clue about how much we spend. They really don't.
Utah is the least expensive state in the country per student, but its outcomes are radically better than Baltimore or New York or Chicago, all of which spend, I think, maybe at least 3 times as much as Utah.
There could be many reasons for that. One of those reasons would be it's one of the highest homeschooling states in the country. So they have a number of families who are homeschooling and getting better results. It could also be that it is a state that has some of the lowest minority demographics in there. There's all sorts of different reasons for why it could be. But Utah definitely has proven that you don't need to spend a lot of money in order to get a quality education. And if you look at a state like Indiana or Florida or Arizona, where there's choice programs that are really broad, you are seeing the families are doing better on NAEP. And the NAEP scores that came out, the private schools did better, and the private schools in Arizona, Florida, and Indiana did better than the public schools.
What's fascinating is, one, we do know that private schools that have discipline and that have parental involvement do dramatically better than public schools that are run by unions and bureaucracies that are not paying attention. I saw one study recently that Mississippi now scores higher than Minnesota in mathematics, which has to be an enormous shock to Minnesotans.
Well, it is shocking. By going back to those basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic in Minnesota, like phonics, they call it the science of reading, but, we know it back in the day as phonics in many ways. Their scores went through the roof, so just some basic reforms that would require traditional public schools to go back to the way they taught could have impact. We all know that choice is having impact. The data is really clear on this. In states where there's school choice, public schools do better than the states without school choice.
There's a recent Open the Books report, their title, The Public School Crisis, higher payrolls associated with worse student performance. And they argue at Open the Books that as payrolls increased in public schools, student performance decreased. That is the opposite of a healthy system.
Well, part of that could be, that is totally true. And Milton Friedman, I think, would call that the machinery of a monopoly at work. The study that we've done shows that between 1950 and 2015, and we've continued this study going forward, the number of kids enrolled in schools went up 100%. The number of teachers went up 250% or so. And the number of non-teachers went up 709%. So think of what happened. School districts brought in 7 times the number of non-teaching staff for the enrollment. And there's just no way you can actually increase the quality of education because those are all administrators. Those are all bureaucrats adding to the system. There are now more non-teachers in K-12 education than are teachers. And so it's no wonder why places like Baltimore that have high payrolls, mostly probably for administrators, are having a challenge in teaching kids.
In this particular report from Open the Books, they point out that there are over 8,800 public school employees earning more than $200,000 a year. I bet almost none of those are teachers.
Probably not. I'm probably a little counterintuitive on this. We talk about superintendents of large school districts making over $250,000 or $300,000. I look at my home city of Indianapolis. Its district is about $750 million or so a year. I don't know of many companies that would pay their CEO $250,000 on a $750 million budget. Maybe if we started treating these districts more like actual businesses, holding the superintendents to true account, we might get different level of talent and be willing to pay them more. Right. So I think one of the challenges of the incentives in the system is not set up to make sure we're getting the best possible talent in there, particularly on the administrator side, in my opinion.
From a Florida perspective, Miami-Dade and Hillsborough get top exam scores while spending less on payroll and employing very few high-salaried staff. Los Angeles Unified, which is an enormous system, spent more per pupil and had many high-paid staff but ranked lower. What do you think is the contrast between the Los Angeles approach and the Miami-Hillsborough approach?
This is a very simple answer to you. Miami-Dade has one of the most robust choice environments in the country. The actual school district will charter schools in its own district. It actually has robust charter schools. It has a tremendous number of kids on private schools on the choice program. It has a number of kids going on the scholarship program, or the tax credit scholarship. It is a robust environment of choice in Miami-Dade. And you know what it doesn't have in LA? A robust environment of choice.
Well, in fact, I assume that the Los Angeles Unified bureaucrats and unions would fight at the barricades to preserve their monopoly.
Yes, they are. And they don't even want any kind of charter schools, which, many people think charter schools are public schools, and they don't even want any kind of reform that would allow charter schools in places like LA. It's tragic that so many kids in the largest school districts are being held captive by folks who don't want a little competition.
What do you think has been the key to the really post-COVID explosion of interest and the number of people migrating towards school choice and the number of state legislatures and governors who have been supporting school choice? What do you think is happening that's led to this transition?
So I think there was a lot of work going into sort of building to this point before 2020, and a lot of good effort building and educating and getting a lot of advocates understanding what was going on. In 2020, a movement that is based on parents became led by parents. And what ended up happening is I think this common cultural experience that we used to have of K-12 education, my mom sent me to a public school, I walked to public school, you walked to public school, was changed and subverted. And the common experience was what's going over a kid's shoulder when they're watching them on the internet, right? Watching a teacher doing the classroom during COVID, that common experience made parents really angry. And they saw that there's something different that was needed. And all of a sudden, parents were saying, we don't care what it is. We want something different. And legislators finally had a voice to say, this isn't a fight about public or private schools. This is a fight about how I can help my parents in my district. And that shift of the conversation is the reason why legislators are now flocking to the idea of ESAs all across the country, because it's no longer a charter versus public, a charter versus private, or private versus public. It's I'm going to do whatever I can to give parents a choice and option. If they choose public schools, great. If they don't, fine. We're just going to give them more choices.
So in that context, as based on your work, the more people understand about the choices, for example, vouchers, support jumps like 15 points once you explain what they are and how they work.
Yeah, our surveys over the last 13 years have been very clear about this. If you ask a parent or anyone just a cold question, do you support school vouchers? It's now over 50%. But if you say, hey, a school voucher is a voucher for a family to attend a non-public or private school of your choice, that number just jumps. The support just jumps. That is true across the board for ESAs and for tax credit scholarships. What's interesting on the ESA number, what we call a cold thing, right? Do you support ESAs? You know who the highest number of supporters are for the cold? Teachers. Teachers love the idea of ESAs. That's part of the reason why micro schools are growing effectively, right? Teachers are frustrated, they're tired, and they want to try something new, and they look at education savings accounts as a way to do so. It's very interesting.
Part of that also is when you explain refundable tax credits for education expenses, it becomes very popular.
Yeah, people like getting their own money back. It's shocking, right? They'd rather spend it themselves rather than the government. Look, all of these things, whether it's a refundable tax credit, it's a charter school, it's a voucher, it's an education savings account, whenever you provide a tiny bit of an explanation, the support from all demographics jumps across the board. It's interesting when you look at the support, for example, of education savings accounts, which demographics supported the most, right? So there's a ton of support for education savings accounts from Hispanic families. They love the concept of ESAs. In school vouchers, African-American families love the concept of school vouchers. It's interesting how you can look at different types and different demographics have different support.
But in every case, you're seeing a support for a fundamental change from the monopoly of the last 100 years.
100%. And legislators have basically said, and I think Democrats are going to have to come around. Look, the tax credit bill that was passed as part of the one big beautiful bill in the Congress last year is going to have to put some pressure on Democrat governors. Are they going to allow their state to participate in a tax credit program that will allow public schools to get scholarships, private schools to get scholarships, and charter schools to get scholarships? It's going to put pressure on them to say, hey, we want to give parents choices even in these blue states.
There are some people, for example, children who are physically or mentally challenged, where you have to think about that costs more. And you almost have to think about, can we design models where if that's the circumstance, then the voucher's bigger or the opportunity's bigger than just people who are coming in who are totally prepared. What's your thinking on that?
So most states in their public school funding formula already give weights to different types of kids. So if you have a special needs kid in Indiana, you're getting higher amounts of money. The reality of all we want is we just want families to be able to get the money that would have been set aside for them to go to whatever school. So the Arizona Choice Program started as a special needs scholarship program. It started for families with special needs group. In my state of Indiana, there is a program just for special needs kids. What you're finding is the families who have children with special unique abilities want more options and would like the dollars to follow the kids. Traditional public schools in Florida and in Arizona have high amounts of money. Like in Texas, the bill that passed, you could get up to $30,000 for your kid to get an education savings account if they qualify under the special needs category. So the goal here is whatever dollars are set aside for your child is what you should be able to get.
It's not like moving away from the current bureaucratic school system is necessarily going to leave behind the most challenged students.
No, in fact, the vast majority of students in Florida and Arizona at the beginning were special needs students. This makes a lot of sense because as a parent of a special needs student myself, there was no way that the district was going to get their hands on my kid, just to be blunt. My son needed something different. Thankfully, I had the ability to pay for private schools, but there are so many parents like me that don't. And when choice comes in, that's exactly what happens. They start taking advantage of that. Like what's happening in Arizona right now, Mr. Speaker, there are these cool little micro schools where families are going to houses that are specifically set up ADA compliant, and they're teaching them horse equine therapy. They're teaching them how to farm. They're teaching math skills and reading skills through these kind of physical activities. And it's amazing.
Describe this concept of a micro school. I understand the words, but I want to understand the concept.
A micro school sometimes is hard to define in the sense that it's typically a smaller setting in a non-sort of building environment that is offered between 1 and 4 days a week. It's not a full-time school. It's typically smaller with a number of kids. It's typically also very unique in its delivery. So there's one micro school called Surf, Skate, Sand, which I love to talk about. They teach kids how to surf and skate. And while doing so, they teach them geometry and algebra, because you have vectors and all of that stuff when you do that, right? So they teach them about waves and motions and sound. And so schools like that are being created to be really unique delivery models for kids who learn in different ways.
Do they then tend to get paired up with other schools for the 3 or 4 days?
No, they go 2 or 3 days and that satisfies it, right? And it's a pay-as-you-go situation. So my friend in Arizona sends her kids to a public school that runs a micro school. So she is enrolled in a public micro school that the kids go to 1 day a week, and the rest they learn at home. So it's this customization, Mr. Speaker, that's really starting to happen around the country.
That's sort of amazing.
Yeah. And teachers are loving it. And Arizona and Florida and places like West Virginia and now New Hampshire, they're the ones leading the way on this kind of customization. This makes sense, right? So when you create a market, the first thing that happens is market segmentation and specialization, right? You're allowing yourself to build new ideas for families who need it. And that's exactly what's happening in these states. It's really intriguing and really unique.
Tell me just for a second, it seems to me that while people are very worried about education, and while conservatives would focus their unhappiness on the Department of Education, there's still a majority of Americans who oppose closing the department, and only about a third support it. How do you evaluate the Department of Education's role in all this?
So what we found in our survey is that parents are saying and public are saying, look, we don't want it to be closed, but we do understand it should be limited, right? So when you ask them what roles it should have, fund kids, make sure special needs kids are taken care of, make sure low-income kids have the funding they need, and then leave the rest aside. The support for idea of going into classroom with mandates, with testing, with curriculum goes way down. So the public, I think, understands that you need the government to have some role, but that role needs to be limited in terms related to funding and making sure that kids have the right needs for the right kids with the right needs.
I was at public events in 1983 when the Reagan administration launched A Nation at Risk, the study which said that if a foreign government did to our children what we are doing to our children, we would consider it an act of war. And I watched us flounder and not be able to come to grips with it. And then in the late 1980s, I was with Governor Tommy Thompson when a former Jesse Jackson state chair, who had been a social worker, Polly Williams, was a state legislator, one time was the longest serving state legislator in Wisconsin history, was a state legislator, and she wanted school choice. Now, in her case, she actually wanted it specifically in Milwaukee, where she felt it was the poor children who were being robbed. Tommy picked this up, and I tried to help them. At the time, it was like voices in the wilderness. You could hardly imagine either the indifference. The business community was not prepared to think this boldly, and it seemed like a strange idea. It has gradually taken off. And in that sense, it seems to me, we may be at the edge of a period of real renaissance and real invention. And 10 or 15 years from now, we may be in a remarkably diverse and intriguing and experimental learning system, unlike anything we currently have.
I couldn't agree more. I think what was once voices in the wilderness is now a chorus of people saying, try something different. What was once voices saying, let's just fix our traditional system, it's now a wide orchestra saying we need to do something different. And my biggest fear is that in 20 to 25 years from now, we'll have gone through all of this and schooling will be delivered the same way. It will look and feel the same way. And if that's the case, then we haven't succeeded. But my guess is, based on what I'm seeing now, the dynamism, the real movement towards private schools, towards new types of schools, public schools going 4 days a week because they don't need to go 5 days a week. The idea of having to go 5 days a week to learn, if you can learn in 4 days, this stuff is happening, and I think it's going to make a big difference.
Let's assume that moving forward, we're going to solve this. We're going to still have 40 or 50 million adults who have been cheated, many of whom are functionally illiterate, can't do math. How do we take the lessons we're currently learning and develop an adult learning capacity so that nobody is permanently trapped if they're willing to learn and willing to show some initiative.
Really appreciate you saying 40, 50 million adults. The stat that really gets me every year is every single year since I moved back to this country in 1996, between 1 and 1.3 million kids have dropped out of school. That's just too many, right? It's just done in our economy and our society can't handle it. What I'm hoping is you'll see the micro school movement and the small school movement and the private school movement start to say, hey, and here's why it's cool. We can take the money in the ESA programs and put it into college. So why can't a child who gets an ESA program, let's say, and gets into a college and gets scholarship, but they have money left in their account? Why can't that go to a parent who needs to get more education? There's ways to do this to create and stimulate new learning. There are dropout prevention schools and charter schools that could also be done in the private sector. So I think there's a lot going on, and we need to move into that audience. There's no doubt.
We could be on the edge of having new learning about learning.
Correct. I think that's right.
And that could, in fact, liberate us in lots of different ways to solve our problems and make us once again the most dynamic and the most competitive country in the world.
Yes, when you think about the idea of moving from seat time to competency as your metric, right? From 5 days a week to whatever works for a kid. For my son, for example, who went to one of the best charter schools in the state, he could have tested out of English in his freshman year. Why did he need to take English for 4 years? Well, because the state told him he had to, right? What if he didn't have to? What if he could learn actually something different in those 4 years? So there's got to be a customization. I think that's what's happening right now. It's really dynamic.
This is very exciting. I want to thank you for joining me. Your new EdChoice report, 2025 Schooling in America, examining trends in public opinion on K-12 education, parent experiences, and school choice, is available now at edchoice.org, and the work you're doing is probably the most significant nationwide effort to continually monitor what's happening and to help people move in the right direction. So I think, Robert, that your dedicated commitment has made a real difference in America.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you were there at the beginning, certainly in D.C., so thank you very much for everything you've done.
Thank you to my guest, Robert Enlow. You can get a link to the EdChoice Report 2025 Schooling in America on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.